that we do here at the Roberts Library. And again, that includes the programs of the Butler Center as well as the Encyclopedia of Arkansas. You can go to robertslibrary.org or encyclopediaofarkansas.net to make either a one-time donation or a recurring donation. You can set it up. It'll take it out every month. We would greatly appreciate your support. Today's talk is being live streamed to YouTube, I think. Yes, yay! And it'll be available immediately following on our YouTube channel. So you'll just go to YouTube and look for Central Arkansas Library System, and that will bring it up. And I do want to give a shout out to my coworkers, Nathan Smith and April and Dre, for making sure we're on time, everything's working, we're not rushing around. So getting these hybrid programs going has been a technological challenge, and it's taken a number of us, so I do appreciate it. And Rhonda will answer questions after she finishes her presentation. Obviously in the room, raise your hand and you can ask your question, and we'll also take questions on Zoom. So on Zoom, you can just put them in the chat. Okay, now for what you came for. In honor of Women's History Month, we're joined by our very own Rhonda Stewart to talk about 6 generations of Arkansas women. She told me earlier that when I told her I wanted her to do this, she thought I was joking. We've known each other long enough. She should know I was not joking. But she is a native of the South End neighborhood of Little Rock and a proud graduate of Parkview High School. And as a Central graduate, we've always had a little bit of a back and forth about that. So I did say at Parkview High School. She has a bachelor's in journalism with an emphasis in public relations from Arkansas State University and a master's in public history from UA Little Rock. She has been here at the Butler Center for 18 years. I think you say it's the longest employment, one-time employment you've had. And she is our genealogy and local history specialist. She's on the 2nd floor of the Roberts Library in the Butler Center. So if you need help with genealogy, this is your girl. So everybody give Rhonda a very warm welcome.
Thank you, Heather. And I'm sitting because I've had some mobility issues, but we're gonna get through this. I am Rhonda Stewart, and like Heather said, this is the first time I've held a job longer than 5 years. I usually get bored and move on, but this one kind of stuck with me. And it's quite interesting because let me tell you how I got here. First of all, my grandmother passed in 1996, and I heard her youngest daughter say all this stuff Mama said about her family wasn't true. And it upset me. And I'm like, how dare you? Because that was my best friend in the whole world. She never lied to me. She may have lied to you, your child, but she never lied to me. I'm a grandchild. And so I went to the public library and started doing my research because the oral history I had was so strong, I figured I'd find something to prove to my aunt that she was lying about my grandmother. And lo and behold, I found quite a bit of stuff. I found things that my grandmother didn't know or hadn't shared with me. And I went back and told this aunt what I found, and she got excited about it because I had the evidence to back her down in what she was saying. And a little while later, she was reading the newspaper and saw an advertisement for a genealogy assistant, and I happened to be without a job at the time. And she said, you need to apply for that. And frankly, my words to her was, them blank folks ain't gonna hire me. She said, just apply. And I was like, okay, stop bothering me, I'll go apply. And I applied, and here I am. And like I said, it's been 18 years. So I guess it was meant to be. It was my grandmother saying, you're gonna go to work over here. I was like, okay, I like this, it's all right. And so that's how I got here. And I appreciate that aunt, even though growing up, she was the one that tortured me the most out of my mother's siblings. My mother was one of 15 children, 14 lived to be adults. And so there was quite a few people around for me to observe and to learn from. But my grandmother was the main teacher in my life that I saw. And so when the opportunity came to do this, I said, why not? And I'm kind of glad I'm seeing my close relatives in here, because everybody said, that ain't how I remember it, or something. This is my story, not theirs. But they'll learn to appreciate it, and they'll be just as proud of it as I am. But let me start with the 6 generations of Arkansas women. Arkansas became a state in 1836. That's the slide you see up there. And the first constitution was in 1836. It was more like the US Constitution. But of course, we're in Arkansas and we changed things around, so it backed things up. But I realized with that first constitution, I had a relative living in the state at the time, and her name was Mary. And Mary, had no clue of it until I started doing the research. But when I took the DNA test, it said that I had some Native American ancestry, and it was the 6th generation back, which would have been Mary. And I'm like, okay, that makes sense, because my grandmother had said, like most people in the southern United States, you have some Native American ancestry. I didn't believe it. And then she said it was Blackfoot, and I'm like, I ain't never heard of them. Who was Blackfoot? And so I started doing my research and whatnot. Like I said, I took the DNA test, and I'm like, oh, that has to fit in with Mary, because I'm 6 generations away from her. So that's who they're talking about, is Mary. I wish I had a picture of her. I do not. Nothing survived that I know of, because like I said, my grandmother didn't know who she was. She knew who her grandmother was, but Mary would have been her great grandmother. And so I was like, okay. I found her in the 1870 census, which confirmed to me that yes, she was born in Arkansas, and yes, she did exist, and she was the mother of my grandmother's grandmother, who I did know quite a few things about. So, starting with this Arkansas as a state, I figured we'd give you a little background on Arkansas the state. And like I say, most of us know Arkansas was a slave state, and all kinds of things were going on there, but Arkansas has always been a little bit different when it came to reality as far as how people live together. So Heather, if we go to that next slide, we give you I titled it Knowing Our Space, because I like to know where I'm at. And the boundaries of Arkansas have changed quite a bit, and I selected this slide simply because it mentions the Native American tribes. And this is all on the Encyclopedia of Arkansas website. If you'd like to go to the Encyclopedia of Arkansas, you can pull up this information that I've just borrowed for this exhibit. But the boundaries of Arkansas changed quite a bit from the original boundaries to what we see now and the shape that we see now. But the states around us didn't change so much. We're still surrounded by the same states. If we go to the next slide, Heather, this is a map I thought was really cool. It's from 1820, and this map shows the shape of Arkansas is more like the shape of Tennessee, just a little bit fatter. And so when you look at Arkansas, Mexico looks real close to us. That's because Mexico was really big. And I've had people come into the research room and ask me sometimes our Latino sisters and brothers will say, well, you don't have anything on my family. I'm like, you don't know. Arkansas has everybody. Anybody and everybody that's been in the United States, you can find a trace of them in Arkansas. We've always had that fluid flow through for the state of Arkansas. And when I look at this map, I understand why, because we were right in the middle of the United States, and we had people flowing from every direction. And so, yes, we have everybody in Arkansas. And I've often told Heather, and I say it quite often during my monthly genealogy workshop, we run the world and people don't know it. Arkansas runs the world and people don't know it. Because you cannot go anywhere on this planet and not find somebody with an Arkansas connection. Because we flow, we migrate. Even someone like Mifflin F. Gibbs, who was in Arkansas, he was born in Philadelphia, moved to Arkansas, left Arkansas, moved to California during the gold rush, came back to Arkansas, ended up being an ambassador in Madagascar, all kinds of things. But he's here, he's buried here. I mean, just that influence that he had here in Arkansas is worldwide because of all the things he did. Arkansas was also one of the places that sent quite a few people to Liberia in the Back to Africa movement during the Marcus Garvey time. So you still find descendants of Arkansas people in Liberia today. So again, we run the world, people don't know. Many musicians, many celebrities have at least one relative in the state of Arkansas. If you ever watched the Finding Your Roots series with Dr. Henry Louis Gates, you will find people connected to Arkansas. Like earlier this year, I found out Carol Burnett is connected to Arkansas. How is Carol Burnett connected to Arkansas? She was one of my favorite, is still one of my favorite comedians, but her grandmother was born in Yale County, Arkansas. So again, we run the world and nobody knows it yet because our people are everywhere and we do great things no matter where we go. And of course, right now in the sports scene, you can't go to any football, basketball, baseball, soccer league and not find somebody with Arkansas connection. The Olympics are full of Arkansas people. I happened to go to college with one Olympian. That's how I really was introduced personally to the Olympics. His name is Al Sweetwater Joyner. He was married to a lady they called Flojo. But we were in college together as freshmen and sophomores and juniors before he left and went to bigger grounds. So again, he and his sister are known throughout the world for their track athleticism, but he was in Arkansas for a while. He was born in Missouri, but he went to school here. So you're always finding people connected to the state of Arkansas, no matter where you look, no matter what you're doing. So when I talk about my connections to Arkansas, I'm serious, because I'm an Arkansas girl. When I got my first college degree, I had people all over the country telling me, you know, you need to move over here. They ain't gonna pay you nothing in Arkansas. I'm like, well, everything's not about money. And as long as I got a place to lay my head, and I don't have to live off anybody, I'm fine with whatever I make. As long as I can feed myself, shelter myself, I'm good. And I like Arkansas. Plus, if I had left, I would have missed so many opportunities to learn so much more about my family members and my neighbors. And so, next slide, please, Heather. That general shape of Arkansas, the one we see now, that's me. I've gone all over the state of Arkansas. I like traveling the state of Arkansas because I find just interesting things to do. And I'm one of those people that I still, when I use a GPS, I just flow, and if I get lost, so be it, because I might see something I need to see. At age 17, I worked on Mount Magazine, and my mother had just learned to drive, but she, in the same month that encouraged me to get this job, which I couldn't imagine them being in the car together for 2 hours, let alone 4, coming and going, but they did. And it was just to drive me up to Mount Magazine so I can attend, well, I had a summer job up on the mountain with the Youth Conservation Corps. And to this day, that's one of my favorite memories. I'm like, I can't believe they even got in the car together and drove. And Mama had just learned how to drive. And she was one of those drivers that if you got too close to her behind, she'll pull over and let you go on. So imagine going up that mountain highway and she's doing that. But that's the only time she drove up there, was to take me to work that summer. And I had to catch the bus back when I came back, and that was fine because I didn't want her on the highway looking for me. And so when I say Arkansas, I'm all over Arkansas. I went to school in Jonesboro because I was far enough to get away from my mother, but close enough to come back home if I needed to in a hurry. Hang out in southern Arkansas, western Arkansas, all over the state, because I just like finding places I had not been and going to see who's living there. Plus, all the friends I made in college, I would gladly go home with them, help them drive, whatever, just to see where they live, what was going on in that little space. And to this day, there's still some little cubby holes in Arkansas that I can go lay my head down in if I need to, because this is Arkansas, and we are family. Let's go to the next slide, please, Heather. The world we were born into. Now I'm talking about these 6 generations. My name is Rhonda Carol Stewart. And if you call me Rhonda Carol, it's because you know me from childhood, okay? And if you call me Rhonda Carol because you're in this room, I know you fake it, okay? That's that simple. But I'm Rhonda Carol Stewart. I'm the daughter of Louise Stewart Shields, who is the daughter of Willie Stewart Toombs, who is the daughter of Nita Rowland Stewart, who is the daughter of Mariah Holyfield Rowland, who is the daughter of Mary and Esau Holyfield. And so those are my people. Those are the women, direct line descendant that I come through. As of this day, like I said, only knew about Mariah. I didn't know about Mary when I started this journey. So I'm excited to find out about Mary, and I'm still looking for things on her. But because I work upstairs in the research room, I don't get much time at all to do my own personal research. And that's fine, because I'm here 8 hours a day just to help other people find their people. Because it brings me joy when they find something they didn't know they had, someone they didn't know they had on their family tree. And we found all kinds of things for you. But one of the things I wanted to do was look at who was the president and who was the governor when each of us was born. Because growing up, I'm always been a studious person. I consume information like it's vegetable. You know, just, I don't care what it's gonna do for my body, I just like it. And so I always like learning. And when I think about my family, I was like, if I had known this as a child, I would have learned a lot more. But as a student of genealogy now, I realized the connections. And so what I did was I looked at all of these people, these 6 women, and I realized who was the president and who was the governor at the time that they were born. And so for me, John F. Kennedy, which I saw his face everywhere my whole time growing up, and Orville Faubus, I knew about him. And so it's like, oh, I didn't realize that he was the governor when I was born until I looked. I'm like, yeah, he did serve quite a few years in state governorship. And so that was nice. And then for my mother, Franklin D. Roosevelt was the president, and Junius Marion Futrell was the governor. Well, I've heard those names. And so I was like, oh, that's kind of interesting. And then for my grandmother, I didn't realize Woodrow Wilson was the president when she was born. And the governor, Charles Hillman Bro, I had heard his name, but he stood out with me because I'm like, oh yeah, he did something good, I think. But the name stuck with me. And so I was like, okay, when she was a baby, this is who was our governor. Of course, there were several others over our lifetime. But going even farther, Nita Rowland Stewart, that's my girl. And I can only imagine what she looked like and how she was, because I'll tell you more about her in a minute, because what they told me about her was very biased, I think. But Grover Cleveland was her president, and Simon Pollard Hughes was the governor at the time of her birth. Mariah Holyfield Rowland, who was born in Morton, by the way, Nita was born in Morton, so was Lily. Louise was born in Little Rock, and I was born in Little Rock. But Mariah, Franklin Pierce was the president, and Elias Nelson Conway was the governor. And with Mary, John Quincy Adams was the president, and George Izzard was the governor. And so I got to thinking about all these names. And I used to be a substitute teacher for a while, and I've always worked with student groups my entire adult life on some kind of level or another. I work with kids. And if I had, in my earlier years, come up with this idea of showing a child how they connect to the people they're studying in history, I think history would be more important and more significant to a lot of children. So if you are one of those people with grandchildren or great-grandchildren, and you want to get your children interested in your family history, consider connecting them to the history they're studying in school, like the presidents or the governors or some other incident that they can connect to their family tree. Because personally, I learned a lot more because I know my family members was living during a certain event, like the Civil War. When I found out who my Civil War ancestor was, I became interested in Civil War history. Up until then, it didn't matter to me. I knew it happened. I heard about it. I studied about it a little bit when I had to. But now I'm really interested in the Civil War. And one of the stories I found out was I realized Mariah lived through the Civil War. She was 8 years old when it started. She was 12 when it ended. And so just imagining how her life was at that time period gives me more respect and craving to learn more about the Civil War, because I know somebody that was there, that was connected to me. And without her, I wouldn't be here. And so with Mary, she was here when the state became a state. So I imagine what Arkansas looked like. I've been on the Buffalo River. I believe she may have been on the Buffalo River, because we move around in the state of Arkansas. I feel like I'm not the only one. I had to get it from somebody. So it may have been from Mariah moving around, or from Mary moving around. And so, at least in my mind, that's what I see. And so when I go around the state of Arkansas, I imagine which of my ancestors may have been in that spot, and for how long, or what were they doing. Let's go to the next slide. Here comes the fun part. That's 6-year-old Rhonda, and Rhonda a little bit older in age. I'm a sixth generation Arkansas woman, like I said. And I selected this picture because 6 is an important year for me. First 6 years of my life, I lived with my grandparents in their home, and my mother and a couple of her siblings and their children. It was a multi-generational home, which was really nice for me, but I had allergies. Kind of got some now. But so a lot of what I learned sitting at the foot of my grandmother while she was ironing clothes. She was a domestic, and ironing was her main source of income. So I got to ask her all kinds of questions, and her deal was, don't be afraid to ask a question. There's no such thing as a dumb question. You might not like the answer you get, but ask your question. And so there were no topics that were off limit. And by the time I was 6 years old, the foundation I had was a good foundation. Couldn't nobody rock me, nothing. Because my grandmother and my grandfather gave me the support I needed, and my mother also, but she wasn't quite mature enough to be the mother she grew into later. So I was glad to have the grandparents there helping me. So when I look at this picture, I think about that supervisor that told me he would destroy me financially right before he fired me. And I'm like, he was talking to that 6-year-old, because that 6-year-old didn't care. You can fire me. I live in Arkansas. You can't stop me from making money in Arkansas. That was my attitude. And I think about that college professor that told me, you have no confidence. And I ignored her because I realized her ignorance did not affect me, because she had no idea of my culture or my upbringing or who I was. And by age 6, I already knew all of that. I already knew that it was in me, because my grandparents had instilled in me who I was and what I could do in life. Excuse me. I also think about that high school teacher that told me I couldn't write. She's the reason why I went and got a degree in journalism. I'm like, why not? I can do whatever I want to do. You know, your opinion really don't matter to me. It's what I think of myself, because that's what was instilled in me as a 6-year-old. Now think about that elementary teacher. And this story is, we'll try to be politically correct with it as I tell it. This was my first experience with a white teacher. My first 2 grade levels, 1 and 2, only had black teachers. I am the bridge between integration and segregation. So as we left segregation and began to integrate, of course, there were conversations going on in my house about what to expect, how to expect it, and what I should and shouldn't do. And I went to Ish Elementary my first 2 years, and Miss Sutton was my 2nd grade teacher. I love Miss Sutton, because Miss Sutton allowed me to ask any question I wanted to ask. And she wasn't intimidated by anything I said, and she was willing to let me work it out in my head and then explain to me why I should or shouldn't consider some other way of looking at that. And so Miss Sutton was really the coolest teacher up to that time. And so I had that strong foundation. I had a teacher that allowed me to express myself and to ask questions of her. And so when I got to the 3rd grade, I had to switch schools. I went to Booker T. Washington Elementary. It was my first experience with a white teacher. And I won't say her name, but we got along okay. But she liked to keep me after school. And she kept me after school because I would get in trouble, because she didn't have enough work to keep me busy. And so I would help everybody else with their work, or I would entertain everybody else. And so I didn't mind staying after school because I like school. And you keep me after school, but I got to be home at a certain time because my mother said so. But a couple of times a month, I informed her that I can't stay after school. But I worked the first month or the 2nd month, and she's like, I don't want to hear that excuse anymore. And I was like, you can't keep me after school today. I got to go to the beauty shop. And she said, black girls don't go to the beauty shop. And I said, B, because profanity was my second language. I said, B, you don't know. And by the time I got to the word no, I'm on the floor looking up at her because she had slapped me. It's like, okay, I got 3 other siblings in this building, and the oldest brother that was in that building was a little bit of a raucous guy, still is. I went and got him. And it was right after Christmas time. He had gotten one of those play guns for Christmas with the red dot in it. He had taken that gun, it was plastic, but he had wrapped it in black electrical tape, and he had it in his pocket, and he marched me back to that room, and he made that teacher apologize to me. And she left there in an ambulance, had a nervous breakdown. They kicked all 4 of us out of public school that day. Mr. Curtis Sykes was the teacher, was the principal. And I remember Mr. Sykes sitting at his desk. Stewart, you know you're wrong. Like, Mr. Sykes, you know what she said to me? Stewart, you know you're wrong, that was your teacher. I'm like, okay. And at that time, people were smoking in their offices, so he had a big cigar in his mouth. And he had a little, I thought, a smile in his eye. And it's like, Mr. Sykes, you know she was wrong, but we had our little debate, and I had to leave. But I like Mr. Sykes. Even to this day, I like Mr. Sykes. I met him many years later, and I had to remind him which child I was. And he's like, yeah, I remember you. Like, it was about 40 years later when I told him who I was. But again, that was that 6-year-old in me that understood who I was and what I had been taught about who I was. And so you couldn't rock me, not even that teacher. And you couldn't define me because I grew up in a household where I was told who I was and how I was defined and how to define myself. Let's go to the next slide. I'm always with family. As a matter of fact, this morning, one of my cousins, Mary Jean Hodges, who is quite the character, some of you may have eaten her food. She used to work, get the name of the restaurant over in the Riverdale area. But anyway, Mary Jean is quite the character. She came up because she had a picture of an obituary. She wanted me to make her a copy so she can give it to her brother. Because whatever she needs, if it has anything that can be done in the library, she's gonna come find me. And I'm like, I'm glad you came today and not yesterday because I wasn't here. She's out of waiting. Okay. Okay, Mary Jean, I'm here, let's get what you need. And I got it, and she got on back to wherever she was going, but she had to demonstrate to me how she was walking yesterday as opposed to how she's walking today. I'm like, she's such a character, but I love her because I love my family. Because one of the best things about growing up in my family is there were so many people that observing those people gave you an idea about who they were, what was going on, who you wanted to be like, who you didn't want to be like, the best of who they were and the worst of who they were. Like I said, my mother was one of 14 siblings that lived to be adults. There were 15 originally, one died in infancy. So I had quite a few people to look at and to choose from. But these are some of my closest cousins, and we're standing on the porch or in the yard of my grandparents' house at 3123 Marshall Street. That house is no longer standing. It was destroyed by a tornado about 20 years ago. But what I learned in that house is you don't have to like me. Even though we're relatives, you don't have to like me, but you can't stop me from loving you, and you can't stop me from praying for me, because that's the foundation that I got from my grandparents, because they showed it to us every day. And I'm like, I think about it now, I'm like, how did they even put up with all of us? I look at the 1950 census for my family, and I realize my grandparents had 6 teenagers in the house at the same time. Now, I know how loud my mother could be. And I know one of her sisters that was just as loud because they were always competitive with each other. And I just imagine the noise in that house. And I'm like, oh, mercy. That is quite interesting. But by the time I came along, every Sunday, my grandfather required all of his children, if they were in the city, to come to his house. He didn't care who was mad at who. That's where I got that attitude from. He said, you coming to my house? Come on. Your children need to meet their cousins, you know. And even to this day, my generation, we all know each other's first cousins, second cousins. But the generation below us, they're complaining about it. They don't know each other. I'm like, one of the things is you don't come to family functions. You will come to a funeral sometimes, but you don't step out there because young people today, I don't know if they're just spoiled or what, but they think it's on the older generation to make sure that we present things for them to do. And I'm like, no, it's your time to take over the family reunion or to take over this or take over that. Y'all just ain't ready yet. And I can forgive you for that, but don't expect us to keep doing it. And so, like I say, I'm always with my family. Yes, in both of those pictures, there's a little me, and I won't point myself out right now, but I'm in there. The next slide, please, Heather. We talk about Lou's children. My mother is Louise, Louise Stewart Shields. Lou was a bartender. She also worked at the VA hospital. She started out in dietetics, moved her way up to the pharmacy. And these are her children. And she had 2 daughters, 3 boys. And one of my first cousins is in the Christmas picture because she was an only child, so she was always at our house. So she's like a sister cousin too. But Lou, I think the best of who we are, we get from our parents. No matter how dysfunctional you may think your parent was, the best of who that parent is always comes down to the next generation. If you don't believe me, this is my example. My little sister, who thinks she's my mother now that my mother has passed, can make my mother's cornbread dressing. I never bothered to try to learn it or to make it, because I was always the prep cook when mama was cooking for holidays. I was always in the kitchen with her. And I know if I had to, I could make it, but I'd never tried it. My sister never helped with anything. She was the baby. She would show up to eat, she'd take a nap, she'd get up and eat again. But right now, she is the one that can make my mother's dressing. I can make the macaroni and cheese, but that came down from grandmama, and I know it. And the cornbread dressing did too. But my sister can make that cornbread dressing. That's why I think, and I know for sure, that the best of who we are comes through. Because even though my sister wasn't in the kitchen, she was waiting on the food to get ready. She knows how to do it because it's in her. It was passed down. And so I like the Christmas picture mainly because of the Christmas tree, because there's so many people that had one of those trees with the color wheel in front of it. Yeah. Let's go to the next slide, please. Like I said, my mother was a bartender, and she was a little bitty woman. And I say little physically, but she was huge. I remember one time my brother, my eldest brother, he's deceased now, Raymond Dean. He said something smart to her. I think he was in junior high or just got into high school, and he was feeling himself, and he said something smart to her. She was in the kitchen, and we were in the living room. And before I knew it, she had come into the living room and had him pinned down between the couch and the coffee table, beating him with the handle of a butcher knife, and did not cut herself. She didn't cut herself. I was just amazed. I'm like, I ain't never doing nothing to mama. I ain't never saying nothing to mama out of line, because she showed me right then it didn't matter how big you were or how strong you were, she could get you. And so Lou, like I say, Lou was something else. And I still run into people now that know her from the bartending scene because she was the mother in the bar. She let people know when they had too much to drink and when they didn't need to be in the bar at all. And what else? Whatever way she could help them, she did. And so I run into people all the time that tell me stories about my mother. And that's nice. When your parent leaves, it's really nice to hear somebody else mention that parent. There's a lady that just passed this weekend that I interviewed for the library. Her name is Mrs. Lois 3. And I interviewed her like 5 or 6 years ago. And this 3, when I realized she knew some of my family members, it gave me joy even more so to interview her, because I realized she was 95 years old, by the way, when she passed this weekend. Miss 3 knew my grandfather's father, my great-grandfather. And I'm like, you knew my people. And 2 of my aunts, the first 2 children of my grandfather, were her best friends. And so when she realized I was one of that family member, she became a surrogate mother to me in a sense. And so she just claimed and loved on me, and I was like, okay, my family still brings me love through the people who they were. Because if they had not been good people, people wouldn't remember them like they do. And so I was glad that Miss Three let me know that she knew my family and what she thought of me. Let's go to the next slide, please, Heather. I learned with and from my family. Education has always been a two-way street. If you don't have young people in your life and older people in your life, you're really not getting the best you can out of life. Young people and older people will give you views that your peers do not give you. And so I like to say, and I like, even if it's just for a moment, to interact with young people. And I like to interact with my elders. It's my peers that give me hell all the time, so I don't always interact with them. But from time to time, I will learn from them also. But learning from and with family. By the way, that the lady sitting on the couch with the two little girls beside her, that's the one that told me Mama Lily was not telling the truth about her family. And that's the one that told me I needed to apply for the job here. And she, Queen Esther is her name. And Queen Esther had a PhD in profanity. So that's where I learned to talk to that third grade teacher. And it just flowed out. It's like she just came into my body and took over when that lady said what she said. I was like, oh, because as I remember telling my mother and grandmother about how it went down, and they were like, you act like Esther. I'm like, maybe she came into my body. Because I got her that day. And then those are some other close family members. Little girl standing up, that's my niece, who is now getting close to 35, I think. And she works for Southwest Airlines out of Dallas. And she flies all over. And I appreciate that because that's one thing we were taught. Go explore. Go find places to visit that you have not been. And that's a family trait that still goes on. Let's go to the next slide, please, Ella. How am I doing on time? Okay. Okay. I'm getting to the end. Lillie Stewart Toombs, that's Mama Lily. That's Mama Lily, Mama Lily, Mama Lily. And the first slide shows Mama Lily, actually with my second oldest nephew. He's close to 38, 39 now. But anyway, Queen Esther's first, and then a couple other relatives. And then Mama Lily on the right side, that's classic Mama Lily, when she dressed up. That's the one that loved everybody. Like I said, my mother was one of 14 children that lived to be adults. 4 of them were biologically from the same mother. The rest of them were, some people say we've never heard stepchildren in our family. They were bonus children. And nobody could tell which one was which, because their mother had died when they were all young. And so the oldest at the time was 10, Mama Lily raised them all. And you couldn't tell which child she gave birth to and which one she didn't. She was also part of that Avery versus Cooper case. 5 of my relatives were part of that case that preceded the Central High crisis. It's based on the Brown versus Board of Education case. Mama Lily is nowhere in the record book on that case. My grandfather is. But I'm like, Mama Lily was running things because she had to get them kids prepared. She had to feed them, make sure they were ready, make sure they understood what they were doing. And so she was part of that history. Let's go to the next slide, please. These are the children of Nita Rowland Stewart. My grandmother making her biscuits. And I like that picture because my cousin Larry is reading the newspaper. We were all taught to read the newspaper. My earliest memory was 2 years old, sitting on the lap of my grandmother while she read me the funnies. And she actually taught me to read with the newspaper. And so I appreciate that because she started the journey that I'm on now. And the picture of the 5 of them, there were actually 6 that lived to be adults. At this point, the other brother is deceased, and they called him what's his name? Let's go cover him. I just blew it. But anyways, Uncle Johnny ain't Ruth, Aura ain't Effie, and Mama Lily, and Little Charlie. They call him Pistol Pete, something like. Anyway, it's because he shot his mouth off all the time. At least that was the explanation I was given. But when I asked Mama Lily and her siblings about their mother, they would always say she was mean. My thing is I studied more of my family. She wasn't mean. She was a disciplinarian because whether she knew it or not, she died at an early age, and she was preparing them to live without her. And so when they were children, she was selling hot tamales on the streets of Morton, Arkansas. And they each had a little rhyme they had to give as they sold her hot tamales. One for a nickel, two for a dime. I would sell them cheaper, but they ain't none of mine. Because they had to bring mama her money down to the exact cent. And she made it where they understood math and everything else, and they knew how to run a business. And they all had individual businesses growing up, during the time that they grew up, whether it was domestic work or whatever it was. They had side businesses to whatever job they may have had. And next slide, please. We go to Louise pretty quick. There's Ruth, Orr, and Lily, just a couple other pictures of them. F is not in these pictures, because F has stayed in Morton the whole time of her life, and these three mainly came to Little Rock, and Ruth moved to Chicago. She was what we considered the rich aunt, because during my lifetime as a student, we always went to Chicago in the summertime to go shopping, so we wouldn't have to wear the same clothes that people in Little Rock wore, because that was Aunt Ruth's thing. Like, okay, let's do this. Next slide, too. Lily and Ruth, they called her sister because she was literally 10 years older than my grandmother. And when their mother died, they were all fairly young, so she was like the second mother to them. And she bossed them around till they wouldn't let her do it anymore. They were in their 70s before they told her, were brave enough to tell her they could do things on their own. They didn't have to listen to her. Hurt her feelings too. I asked her, she lived to be 95, Aunt Ruth did, sister. And I asked her, I said, what's it like to be 95? She said, it's boring. I'm like, no, you're boring because you don't like to be around people and you don't want people looking at your stuff. And so it's you, it's not them. But I appreciate her telling me that it was boring. I'm like, I'm gonna get there and see if it is boring, because I'm gonna be different from you. The next slide, please. Faces connected to Mariah Holyfield Rowland. I do not have a picture of Mariah. I wish I did. I can imagine what she looked like. Her nickname was Skeet. I imagine it's because, like my grandmother, she was thin and tall like a mosquito. And why else would you name a child Skeet? But anyway, Mariah, what I knew about her is she owned a white horse. I did find a record for that, where she paid taxes on a horse, but I knew it was a white horse because of her children, grandchildren telling me about it. Again, that grandparent-grandchild relationship was important because they passed down it and verified that family history that I'd heard from Mama Little. And these are some of my other aunts, and well, one other aunt, and my sister, and a couple of my nieces, because they all connect to Skeet. And the records I find on Skeet, she gave birth to at least 13 children, but only one lived to be an adult, and that was Nita. So it only took that one to get me here. Let's go to the next slide, please. More faces connected to Mariah. When I look through my pictures, and I literally have thousands of photographs, because I've been taking pictures of my family ever since I can remember. But that's a Polaroid shot on the left side. And that particular relative, Billie Jean is her name. And I was like, we got a Billie Jean, we got a Billy, we got a Millie, we got a Willie, and we got a Lily, all in the same thing. I'm like, y'all can come up with different names, but that's okay. I enjoy those names. It makes it easy for me. Let's go to the next slide, please. Again, more faces that connect to Mary Holyfield. And the lady I was talking about earlier, the cousin that came upstairs today, Mary Jean, she's in the red in this picture. I wouldn't show her this because she gets so emotional. And she was explaining to me how she was having a hard time because she's getting older. And I'm like, okay, I'm not gonna show her anything. And again, that's me as a young child with my brother that pulled a gun on the teacher. So just knowing, Mary, we apologize, but we're still holding up your name because we are doing what we need to do. Next slide, please. Family is family. We had a family reunion, the last one was in 2018, and right before COVID, and we're thankful we did it then because we hadn't had anything since other than funerals. But again, there's so many of us. I tell people all the time I'm related to over 300 people here in Pulaski County, and that's a lot of people. And I was talking to a cousin of mine just the other day. He's like, you keep saying that, what's your proof? I said, well, right out the bat, I can give you names of 3 guys in the family that had 10 children each. And these are young guys. I mean, I say young because they're younger than me. They're younger than me. Let me leave it at that. But each one of these guys got 10 children. And so I'm like, see, there's at least 300 of us here. That's 10% of the total I'm telling you about. Because I've counted these people up. I know who they are. Next slide. This is part of my job to do the research. Fulfilling the promise from one generation to the next generation. This is my niece, my sister's child, Shannon. Shannon got a, because she has to outdo everybody. She had a double major in her bachelor. She had a double major in her master's. She's just an overachiever, but she's good. And that is actually at a graduate degree ceremony. And I thought about it, like when she was a little bitty girl, she was at my graduation for my graduate degree. And I hope I inspired her to go on. And I'm thinking that's why she got double, because she had to outdo me. And I'm fine with that. Keep outdoing me. Keep doing what you do. And this last slide, this is the 6th, 7th, and 8th generation of Mary Holyfield. 6th, 7th, and 8th. And all those little kids on the couch, they're all in their late 20s now. And 3 of them are parents themselves, so there's actually a 9th generation that is actually walking around Pulaski County, Arkansas, that connects to Mary Holyfield, and is the beginning, as far as I know, of my family tree in the state of Arkansas. So with that, I thank you all for listening, and appreciate you coming out to hear about my family. And I hope if you have not done your own family history, you will, because you're gonna find somebody that reminds you of you. You're gonna find someone that you wish you had been like, and you're gonna find somebody that's gonna inspire you to do something else. And you're gonna see some similarities, whether it's what you like to do as a hobby or what you like to do professionally. You will find something that is common on your family tree with who you are today. Right. Any questions?
They had a birthday party for Rhonda down
Yeah.
Cliff Community Center or something like that.
Yeah.
So they had this birthday party, and I went, and I literally walked into what looks like a conference for Rhonda. I mean, it was people everywhere. I had never seen that many people in one place for one person. So she's not exaggerating when there's 300 people.
That was just a small crowd. I have yet to get them all together at one time.
Let me take a couple of questions off of Zoom, and then we can take questions from the audience here. Mary Evans would like to know where did the 4 of you go to school after you got kicked out?
We actually went to St. Bartholomew because we couldn't go to public school anymore. And that was a stressful time for me. My hair fell out because I was worried about my mother not finding, because she told me, you can't get kicked out of this school because you ain't got nowhere else to go. And so I knew I had to keep my mouth shut and try to be nice, but the nuns irritated me. They irritated me and they irritated me. And sometimes I did get in trouble, but I stayed there. But like I said, I was in 4th grade, my hair was coming out, I didn't know what to do. And my Aunt Aura, my grandmother's youngest sister, wanted me to wear a wig. I'm like, I'll just be bald headed because I'm not wearing no wig. So when I look at my hair today, I'm like, I survived. I survived.
Well, and you've said it before, and you say it every month when we do Finding Family Facts. But this kind of documenting of your family history is so important because, we read about famous people or infamous people, but it's the everyday people like you and me. It's the stories.
We make up the community.
We make up the community.
Yeah.
Exactly. What has been the most challenging and rewarding part of documenting your family lineage?
The most challenging is finding more information on Mary. Like I say, I know she was married to Esau, but I found nothing on him other than the fact that he was possibly her husband. And that's because they were living in the same house at one point. Don't know what happened to him. I would like to know what happened to Esau and where he came from, who he was. So that's been the most difficult. What was the other part of the question?
Most rewarding.
The most rewarding was when I found out about Mary, because that was something my grandmother didn't know and hadn't shared with me because she didn't have that information. But I found it. I can't wait to tell her about it too. Like, we're gonna meet up again. We're gonna have that conversation.
And she was in Lewisburg, Arkansas.
Lewisburg, Arkansas.
Yes.
And Lewisburg, Arkansas, like I say, I've learned quite a bit about the Civil War. There was a major battle there. They also had a Ku Klux Klan raid through that town, and they also had martial law in that area. And it's all during the time period that Mariah and Mary were alive. And Mariah had two sisters that I hadn't traced also, Nancy and Renee. I think it's pronounced Renee, spelled R-E-N-A. But since I have a niece named Renee, I'm like, yeah, her name was Renee because she's the reason my brother named you Renee. So.
And Lewisburg is Columbia County, right?
No. It's in Conway County.
Oh, so
yeah.
it's
right below Moore.
But then there's Louisville.
Yeah,
what I'm thinking
yeah,
about.
Louisville.
Okay, sorry,
Yeah.
I was getting on the church. Questions from the audience here. We'll go with Kay.
Yeah, I was curious to see that there were 3 generations that were to Morton.
Right.
So are there stories about life in Morton that were passed down until people moved?
Yeah, actually, one of my grandmother's sisters, the one that never moved out of Morton, her name was Effie Stewart Johnson. And Effie was quite the character. She lived in this big old green house, and I was just like, well, she got a nice house. She had a husband. I guess they bought this house. Nobody ever told me that was the house that her parents and grandparents were living in. So I had walked through the house of my ancestors without knowing it. And so that house burned down one year, and I saved a few photographs that were not burned. And I'm like, I wonder if she was the one that hid all the family photographs. Because I do have a photograph of my grandmother's grandfather, but there's no photograph I found of her grandmother. And I'm like, ain't Effie had all this stuff and hid it, because she was that type of person. At least I thought she was. And then there were quite a few stories about Morton. One of them I got from Imogene Brooks Brown, Minnie Jean's mother, Minnie Jean Brown Tricky. She grew up with my grandparents, my grandmother in Morton. And so they were all in that social circle together. And so when I got to meet her when I was working at the Central High Museum, and we got to talking, and she would tell me different stories about my family as they were growing up. And so you never can underestimate what the friends of your family members will tell you about them. So don't be afraid to ask people that were in the neighborhood. When you look at a census record, there's a whole page of names. A lot of times somebody in your family married somebody off of that page because they were close by or whatnot. And so look at the census record in whole, look page before, page afterwards, and find out who they were socializing with. There are no famous people without us non-famous people. My Aunt Ruth, that I showed in that picture, the lightest of the 5, she, when she first moved to Little Rock, she was working for a guy that sold real estate, but he lived right next door to the governor at that time. And I'm like, I bet she put some bugs in his ear, because I know she did, because she's nosy, number one, and she likes telling people what to do. And so I'm sure she had something to say to the governor, living so close to him. Any other questions?
Any other questions? Yes, ma'am.
I'm curious because your very first slide where it was Stewart's, what is the significance of Stewart? Because if you look back, a lot of the women as a middle name, and then it appears as a last name.
It is, Stewart came into the family with Nita. Nita was born Nita Rowland. She's the daughter of Mariah, my grandmother's grandmother. And when she married Charlie Stewart, he had come over from Tennessee, and that's where the Stewart line comes in. That's the name I still wear today, because it's the maternal line of my grandmother. And so Mariah was married to John Rowland, and they had Nita. Like I say, the only child that survived. She gave birth to 13, but Nita was the only one that survived to adulthood. And when she married Charlie Stewart, that's just been a dominant name. And then Mama Lily married Toombs, so that's why it's Stewart Toombs. And because that marriage combined children from 3 different marriages. And my grandfather was married 3 times. First wife gave him 2 children, and then she divorced him during the lynching of John Carter, as a matter of fact. And my idea is that she was afraid because he was so emotional at that moment. He was a young man in his mid-20s. He had lived through the events of the Lane race riot. He had lived through the events of the Tulsa massacre, and here he is living through a lynching in Little Rock, Arkansas. And so I imagine, because I know my male cousins and their personalities, and they got it from somewhere, he was raised in holy hell, and he scared her, and she went back to living with her parents in West Rock, the West Rock community here in Little Rock, which is where my great-grandparents also lived. And so that marriage dissolved, they divorced. He married Myrtle Mae Pfeiffer from Southwest Arkansas, Arkadelphia area, and she gave birth to 9 children, 8 of which lived to be adults. And she died from complications of childbirth with that the 9th child. And so that child was in diapers when Mama Lily married Papa. And so together, she brought 2 children into the marriage. They had 2 children together. And so we're that blended family in the realest sense of blending a family. And again, my grandparents never mentioned step anything, or that's a label that a lot of people would put on families. And I see the legal reason for it, but it makes no sense to me, because every family is a blended family. We're in the Bible Belt, the South. This is the South, the Bible Belt. Jesus Christ was in a blended family. So if it's good enough for him, it's good enough for all of us, the way I look at it. Any other questions?
We've got 2 from Zoom. Mary wants to know, did you really have to go to the beauty shop?
Yeah, my mother didn't do hair. She did not do hair. I've been going to the beauty shop since my earliest memories. And
so you weren't trying to get out?
I wasn't trying to get out. I really
had.
there was a scheduled time that I had to be at the beauty shop. I had to make sure my little sister was there, because that was my assignment. Because I could care less whether I went to the beauty shop, see? But by the way, this was quite the adventure too, because I wouldn't do it for a long time because I was afraid of my mother and her reaction. But my brother finally talked me into it, and she said, okay, it's all right. I'm like, good. And I was in my 30s.
And then also, Judy Rose would like to know if you are related to, if you have any family connections with the Stewart and Shields family from Jefferson County, Mississippi.
I am not sure, but my bonus father was Edward Shields. And so his family came out of the McAllen, Arkansas area that I know of. I don't know how deep they are from there, because I hadn't done much research on his family. But the Shields is a unique name in the United States. Michelle Obama was a Shields, her family line. And so I'm like, yeah, there's got to be a connection somewhere. But the Stewarts, there's one brother that I had not been able to track either way. I found him on one census. He was a younger brother to my great-grandfather, and Thomas was his name. But again, knowing the men in my family, it's possible he produced quite a few children. And so, like I said, I got 3 relatives I can think of right now with 10 children each. So I'm not sure on that line.
Any other questions from the audience here? Yes, sir.
I don't have a question, but this is a comment. It's good for family to know their history and pass it on from generation to generation. And you've done an outstanding job, a marvelous job in sharing this, and keep going on and share it with our children. That history is good to know, but pass it on.
All right, thank you. You act like my grandpa. That's what I learned from my grandpa.
It is. It's so important. So I will put a plug in. Rhonda does a class called Finding Family Facts on the 2nd Monday of the month at 3:30. We do it virtually, and I get to tag along for the fun. We also have a memory lab here where you can scan your photographs and digitize your VHS, beta, and audio cassettes to preserve that history, because it is so important that we tell our stories and write it down. You're always telling people, write it down.
There are so many places you can house your history. Even if you don't think you're a good writer, you got a photograph of your great-grandparents, submit it to the county historical journal in the county that they live, the state historical quarterly in the state that they live. Even just that photograph cements your history for the rest of the world, and for somebody to come back and find more. It may be the clue that they need to explore more or to find more about your family history. So whether it's a blog or podcasts nowadays, all this fancy things you can do with your history, or if it's just a paragraph that you write down, submit it to one of the county historical journals. And for every county that your folks live in, you can submit that same information, whether it's Arkansas, Mississippi, Alabama, wherever. Submit to the county historical journal, and definitely push your family history out there, because every family is important. The United States is a young country, and we're young enough that everybody's history counts. So no matter who you think you are, because I get, especially when I first started working here, Daddy wasn't nothing but a dirt farmer. I'm like, well, dirt is still a commodity, you know. So what are you saying? Daddy had money or he didn't? What is it? Find out, you know. And so when you find out, write about it and submit it to a historical journal somewhere, because your family is important. If it wasn't, you wouldn't be sitting here.
Thank you, Rhonda. Thank you for doing
Thank
this.
you.
I might not ask you for another couple of years.
Definitely. No, Heather and I go back a very long way, and I tell her all the time, I like you because of your mother.
She does. She likes my mother.
Yeah. I don't get along with my peers. I get along with the elders and the young people.
They bonded over, my mom likes to call a lot, and used to, when we worked together, we had the same phone number, and so my mom would call and talk to Rhonda. So they bonded. Next month, we're gonna be joined by Brian Thompson, who's gonna talk about saving the Buffalo River a second time. So we're talking about hog farming. So mark your calendar, Wednesday, April 5th at noon. We're gonna be back here in 124, or on Zoom, whichever way you'd like to join us. So thank you all for being here today, both in person and Zoom. Have a great day.
All right. Thank you. Thanks to the crew.
Thank you.
Good job.
I'm so glad this is over.
Now you can go take a nap.